here, and being this is OCD Awareness Week, I thought I'd shoot a video to explain a bit more about what is OCD and in particular what it's like to live with a child with OCD. So first of all, what is OCD? OCD is when you've got obsessions, and they're not obsessions like my daughter obsesses over Beyonce or obsesses over fashion. They're not those sort of obsessions, they're bad obsessions. They're obsessing on things that they wouldn't normally think about. Then you've got the compulsive part then, and that is actually actions that your thoughts tell you to do that will make the situation better or keep you safe. And again, they would be actions you wouldn't normally do, and unfortunately the more you do it, the more you then have to do it. And then the disorder bit is self-explanatory. It's a condition you develop whereby you can't release these thoughts, whereas most of us have bad thoughts at some point or some doubting thoughts. Most of us will release it and they will actually pass through. But with OCD, that thought gets trapped and it keeps going round and round like on a cog of a wheel, if you like. And the more you feed it, the more demands it will make. So if you do something, wash your hands once today, guaranteed by tomorrow it'll be 2 times, and then another time it'll be 3 times, and etc. So, and also the disorder part is whereby it can be genetic. You can actually pass it down the lines, and it's believed that possibly my daughter got some of the traits from me. Because although I wouldn't class myself now as ever having had OCD, although I refer to it as OCD, the difference was I would check a few times were the tongs unswitched or were was the cooker switched off. But I could leave the house once I had checked once or twice. When you've got full-blown OCD, as I've now discovered since my daughter had it, you have to keep doing it and keep doing it. You cannot release that thought at all. So whereby my thought was a bit slower to release, but it did eventually release. With my daughter, when you've got proper condition of OCD, it doesn't release and it gets worse and worse. I often remember it being referred to as a greedy monster, and that was the best analogy really for me to try and understand it. And the way they explained it was this. They said that with the greedy monster, the more you feed it, i.e. the more you do what it asks you to do, the more it wants. It never ever gets full, the demands get more and more. And what it also does, it'll recruit everybody in its path. So in the end, me, my husband, my other daughter, we were all doing anything that OCD demanded. And it became miserable. In the end, we had nobody coming to the house for over 3 years, no friends, no family. My other daughter couldn't have her friends around. She had to make excuses why she couldn't sort of have her friends around, because it would make my other daughter so anxious and uncomfortable, and it would result then in having to totally deep clean the house. And that's just a little small bit of what it was like living with a child with OCD. I don't divulge too much about the condition because obviously my daughter kept things very private, and that can be quite common with an OCD sufferer. They feel embarrassed, they feel silly, but to them the thoughts are very real. And when they explain them to you, believe it or not, you will sort of end up, oh yeah, I sort of understand where she's coming from with that. And it will get you sort of thinking, if it makes sense, that it does make sense for her to do these things to keep herself safe. As a result, it became a very costly, expensive process for us, because we got better wipes, better hand sanitizer, better spray. Because in the end, she didn't just need wipes, it then developed she needed a spray. She needed the hand sanitizer, and at one point her hands, bless her, were just cracked and bleeding and raw. It was heartbreaking. We eventually got the help we needed after she developed a really full-blown, well, I don't suppose you call it a breakdown, but I suppose it'd be an OCD breakdown. And we were very fortunate to get the help of a specialist team within CAMS, which are called KIT, and they were absolutely superb. Did we have a cure overnight? No, we didn't, sadly. It was over 3 years of painstakingly slow, frustratingly slow therapy. And now I'm pleased to say she's almost 19 and she's about 80% cured, and she's doing well all the time. There'll always be that little bit of OCD there. I don't think she'll ever be completely cured, but to watch your daughter suddenly go from leading an isolated, miserable, controlled life to having a life where she's having friends around and where we can have friends around, and where she goes out with us. In fact, she's more out now, except for COVID. She's had to stay in again, but she's been more out than she's in. There are no words you can express, because if you can imagine being a mum whereby you can't even console your daughter, you're watching her having a full-blown meltdown where she doesn't feel life is even worth anything because it's so miserable, and I can't even put my arms around her to hug her. If you can imagine your younger daughter then losing out on some of the attention, because obviously you've got to focus a lot of attention to the child that's got OCD, because OCD demands it, it commands it more to the point. So she's sort of feeling isolated and probably confused, not knowing why these thoughts that aren't real are controlling a whole household. And if you can imagine just watching your child losing valuable years, teenage years, when she should be having the best time of her life, in utter misery. I mean, her attendance at one point in school, I believe, went down to about 30 or 40%. In the end, I mean, the biology teacher, for example, didn't even know whether to put her on the foundation level of the course because he had nothing to base it on. But anyway, we begged him to put her in for the GCSE, and thank goodness we did, because she ended up with all A stars and A's. And in particular, in the science, she had full marks. So testimony to how, despite being desperately ill, how much that person will try and hide it and sort of concentrate their efforts then into other things instead, which in her case, it became an obsession really over getting the A stars, I guess. It can lead to eating disorders as well, where the eating gets controlled by the mind. It tells them they're fat when they're not. It tells them they should starve themselves. It would be too much actually to explain in one video. But if you were to ask me what it's like to have a child with OCD, it's miserable, it's frustrating, it's lonely, it's expensive, because part of the therapy as well involves giving them rewards. And sometimes if they're going to actually try and achieve a big thing on their list, because they make big lists, then it can be quite an expensive reward, because it's got to be something that really, really motivates them to step out slowly from those controls and to try and do things differently. But as I say, like nearly 4 years later, we've got a daughter who's sort of 80% cured, and this has inspired me to turn a negative into a positive, and I've stepped well and truly out of my comfort zone, and I've actually written a children's storybook where I hope to actually get parents of children between 5 and 8 years old to identify any early signs, because the best thing to do is like a seed, if you like. The best way to describe it is a seed growing, and if you can crush that seed in the initial stages to stop it growing, then obviously the OCD then won't take control like it did with my daughter. So anyway, I'll pop a link to my Facebook page, because I've got a Facebook page designated to actually OCD and recognising the symptoms. I'll also put there's a link on my page then as to how to pre-order the book as well. Love you to actually like my page, because obviously the more people that like it, the more people I can get my message in front of. And more importantly, with my book, my main purpose of the book is that I'm donating 50% to Kit, who helped us massively, because they're so desperately short of funds. And my fear is now during COVID-19, goodness knows how many more children are going to develop OCD. And on that point, one tip I would give you is obviously they're now in abnormal times. They're seeing people with masks. They're being forced to wash their hands. There's big focus on keeping clean, keeping germs away. What I would stress to you is that once this is over, and God willing it'll be over in 6 months hopefully, make sure that those actions don't continue. You need to make sure that you explain to them this is only a temporary measure we need to do, and that it's not unsafe, and they're not going to die from it, but they just have to protect the elderly, so that they don't hold on to thoughts after this pandemic is over where they think they've got to wash their hands and do all these hand sanitising, etc., to stay safe. Alright, so that's it for today's video on your child, how to cope with a child with OCD and to spot the early signs. Like I said, please like my page. We're on the link below. It would be great to have more likes, and I say get more recognition to this cruel, debilitating illness. Okay, so that's it for today. See you on the next video.